In order to mate the motor to the transmission, I needed to create a custom coupler that connects the motor shaft to the driven shaft in the transmission. Additionally, I had to create a custom adapter plate that mounts the full motor to the bell housing on the transmission. I started by making a cardboard shape to position the holes from the bell housing and mark the center of the transmission shaft.
So I've marked the 3 easily accessible holes. So you can see one right here, one right here, and the last one is down here. And so what I'll do is I'll mark them, I'll punch these out, make sure they're in the right spot, and then that piece of plywood down there, I will trace the adapter plate onto, drill those 3 holes, and then I'll be able to securely have that in place, and I can mark the rest of them on the plywood adapter plate. And the plywood adapter plate is not permanent, it is just to make sure everything is correct, and then once I verify that the plywood adapter plate is correct, then I can transfer it and make it out of metal, rather than wasting however much time and money it would take to make a metal adapter plate and realize that it's wrong. It's much easier and cheaper to do with wood. Right, as you can see, I have the hole saw on the adapter plate, and as you can see, if I try to move it around, it won't, because it's in the transmission shaft. And then all I have to do is mark around the outside, and then I will use this hole saw to drill the hole for the adapter or for the coupler to sit in. So I have my template for the motor holes done, and you can see I have these 4 bolts in securing it, and those are the holes. And the way I figured out where they were was, first I have my coupler taken apart, and I slid this one there like that. I won't slide it any further because it gets very tight and won't want to come off. And then I used that same hole saw to drill that hole, and had this tight up against and this around, and I marked the circle. If I come around to this side, you can see my Sharpie line on where the circle goes for the motor. And then what I did was I rubbed oil on the motor, and I made this template out of a paper towel. So I pressed it against, and it showed me where the edge was, and this little divot here is that piece right there. And it also showed me where the holes were, which I have marked there. And then on my circle, I laid it like this, had this around my Sharpie line, marked my 2 holes, and then I would move it, put that hole in the other one, and mark this one, do it like this, and then I verified that this hole lined up with the first one I made, and it did. So then I drilled out the holes after they were marked and test fitted it on here to make sure it's fine, and it is. And as you can see, that is the right reveal around the edge of the shaft. It looks a little funny because of the angle the camera is at, but I verified that that is the correct reveal. So now all I have to do is make sure everything fits together.
To make the final plywood prototype, I transferred the holes from the motor hole template in the previous clip onto the main plywood adapter plate.
So I've gotten the bolts to mount the adapter plate onto the motor. You can see 4 of them here, and they run through the adapter plate template and these 2 spacers, and then go through mounting this to the motor. And you can see, if I'm strong enough to lift with one hand, let me attempt to set this down here so you can see. It's good and solid. And you can see here this, like the cutout here, and you can see in there the motor shaft spins this here, and you can see the motor shaft in there. And I have a key, a motor key, like the key for the shaft in there, which secures that. So this adapter plate will bolt into the car using the original holes there, and then this side over here will attach in some way to a like friction or a mount on here. This was just temporary seeing something, so I will figure out exactly how to mount the other end, because I had thought the mounting bolt would be here, but I rearranged the orientation of the motor. So the mounting points are more here and here on top of the motor, as you can see here in this orientation on the side and the top pretty much. So that will be figured out at a later point. So as you can see, I have the motor installed here. You can see I have 3 of the bolts in and 2 more here and here. I still have to drill out, and then as you can see on this end, there's a bolt here and another one right in there, and those are securing the motor on this end. So you can see this curved original mount for the engine, and I have this piece here which is holding the motor, and then an L bracket to attach to there, and this piece of metal spanning between the original mount and this to keep everything where it belongs. So this all supports this end of the motor, and then the other end of the motor is supported by the bolts going through to the transmission.
Once I verified that the plywood adapter was correct, I purchased a 1/2-inch steel plate to make the adapter plate out of.
I have the plywood adapter plate on top of the metal, and I already have 2 holes through. So what I do is, first I marked the first hole, or I laid it on approximately where I wanted it, so that this straight edge lines up with that. This long straight edge lines up there. Just less cutting I have to do. And then what I did was I marked using my 1/2-inch punch, drilled that one out, stuck that through the hole, did the same thing here. So now I will be, and I'm gonna check it on each one to make sure that my holes go in the right spot. So I put my punch down through, I grab the hammer. So right here is the indentation from the punch. So this point on the end of the punch, what it did was when it was sitting through, it went down and punched that hole in.
I circled the hole to make it easier to find, and then drilled it out using a 1/2-inch drill bit in the drill press.
The adapter plate has been cut out, and I've used a chisel here to remove all the splattering that was on the bottom side. This was the side that was down when it was cut. So then I'm just going to smooth out all these inside and outside edges because they're still a little rough in there. You can see like there's a burr I pulled off, so I'm going to get all that off so it's more clean, and then I'm going to paint it with like a metal anti-rust paint, because if you look on this side, I laid it down in the driveway and it was raining a little bit and it already has rust on it. So for being outside in the rain for about 20 minutes, this happened. So you can imagine what would happen if it was in the car for a year and gets water on it just from being exposed to the weather. So I'm going to put some anti-rust paint on so that this does not happen. I have my metal adapter plate painted, and I now have it fastened onto the motor. So this is the structural metal adapter plate here, and these are just two pieces of 3/4 inch plywood that I'm using as spacers so that I have the correct distance between where this motor is and the shaft that's sticking out and the inside of the transmission. So I have my coupler here, and you can see in there is a white 3D printed piece, and it is a slightly enlarged version of this because when I put this in it would move around a little. It wasn't quite a snug fit, but this here, very snug fit. This is the whole red piece, and the modified clutch disc is only being held in by the friction. So this is pretty well perfectly lined up with the modified clutch disc. Now the issue I'm running into is if I have this punch here from the punch set and I slip it in one of these smaller holes, it has some play where it can move around. But if I go the next size up and I don't drop it, it doesn't fit down in. So I don't know how to make sure that this is perfectly straight up and down, because if this is, say, straight up and down, and then I accidentally get it like that, and I punch it, then that hole is in the wrong spot, which means that then this isn't in the right spot, which then that white piece is completely useless and it's for nothing. So I think what I'm going to try to do instead is get probably someone to weld it for me, kind of in between each of these, and maybe even in there, and if it welds this washer down, then that's fine. And the other advantage of that is if I went with the bolt method, I only have a 1/4 inch that I'm bolting into, and that doesn't seem incredibly strong to me.
I did end up having the motor shaft sleeve welded to the assembly, both where I showed and also through the bolt holes to increase the strength. Somehow I got too excited and forgot to film the final assembly going into the vehicle, but it fits well and mates the transmission and motor.